I do appreciate that you're still with us. You're watching Village Square Africa, and we're looking at the approval in South Africa of sign language as the 12th official language. We've spoken with a member of parliament to understand the journey to this point. Now, we want to look at the sign language in South Africa, and I have Bruno Druchen, the National Director of DeafSA, joining me from Cape Town. Welcome to the square, sir. I just want to be sure you can hear me before I ask my question.
Couldn't hear the question.
I'm just saying welcome to the square.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to be here. I'm very excited to be with you at the Village Square Africa.
So I've spoken earlier to Wilmer about the process that got us here. So I want to speak with you about the challenges we're expecting to see with the full adoption of sign language in South Africa.
The person voicing for me now is Francois Deisel. He's my South African Sign Language interpreter. He's a qualified interpreter. I'm sure you know about this event of Mandela's funeral where we had the fake interpreter, but I have a proper interpreter with me. So my name is Bruno Druchen. Parliament approved South African Sign Language to be official language. So I don't foresee any challenges that will happen after this approval. So I know that there's more public awareness regarding South African Sign Language being official language. When it was approved for South African Sign Language, we know that all schools of the deaf already have South African Sign Language as a subject. We know that teachers are being trained to be fluent in South African Sign Language. And so we just need more news bulletins be in South African Sign Language, and we need more access to courts. Currently in South Africa, we have 12 accredited interpreters in courts, but this will create more opportunities for deaf people that have their own businesses in training South African Sign Language. So we need to create more opportunities for deaf people to train South African Sign Language.
That's very good to know. You already have a curriculum judged as one of the best in the world, actually. Well, there is the question of teachers. How is this challenge being addressed, and how helpful will this of making sign language an official language increase the number of teachers?
We know that in the world, nationally and internationally, we do have schools of the deaf that teachers who use sign language. But if you look at some of the deaf schools that uses sign language, but when they do educate in South African Sign Language, some teachers use total communication. That is then signed exact English. Nothing wrong with it, but there's a difference between total communication and fluent signing. So in South Africa, we do have those few teachers that are fluent in South African Sign Language, and the remaining of the teachers are using signed exact English. They use the English structure and then apply then South African Sign Language on the English structure. That is actually wrong. They need to use sign language in its own form, in its own structure, with facial expressions. That's why we encourage schools to adapt deaf teacher assistants, to accept them, and then to train them South African Sign Language. We also have a wonderful linguist that is part of this structure to teach the teachers South African Sign Language in order for them to become fluent. So the children will know the difference between total communication and South African Sign Language. So the daily communication of deaf children and deaf adults are not total communication. It's South African Sign Language, and fluently they do communicate with one another in sign. So that is also applied worldwide.
Okay, what's the level of awareness of the deaf culture and sign language, and what more can be done to promote and educate people on sign language and deaf culture, not just at the school, but in the general society?
Sign language can create, can participate in the economy as well. So it's not only for deaf schools, but it can be offered on a college level. It can also be offered at a university level. And with that, they can get their BA, MA, or PhD level in sign language. It can benefit so many people and the society out there. It's so many people think that South African Sign Language or sign language is not a real language. So it will depend on government to create awareness, and especially hearing kids, the hearing youth can also learn South African Sign Language. So we need to make sure that movies are accessible as well. So Netflix do have caption services, but we need to have maybe sign language in those movies as well. So to build, that is building a bridge between Bruno's freezing, so that can then, in mainstream schools, that can also then be applied. Every country, so they are ordinary members of the World Federation of the Deaf. And currently we have 135 countries that are affiliated to the World Federation of the Deaf, which Nigeria is one of them. So, and they recognize that South Africa, their language is sign language, and also recognized in their respective countries.
Are there public institutions that have been most proactive in promoting inclusivity for the deaf community? If there are, what major lessons, maybe 2 or 3, can others learn from them now that it is an official language?
One example that I can give, I already spoke about the schools, and where everybody is aware that sign language is a subject in the schools of the deaf. So many hearing people in hearing school are starting to ask us as a deaf association to learn South African Sign Language. They want to learn South African Sign Language to be able to communicate to a deaf person. One of the challenges that we are facing at the moment is that South African Sign Language is taught, but the numbers are very small, but we cannot meet the demand. So that's why we want to raise awareness. So when South African Sign Language is an official, so are you ready? Are you ready when this is now official? So deaf people are ready, but is government ready to accommodate the deaf community? So this is an official language that will become government's responsibility to make sure that there is support towards the deaf community and as well towards the public. So what I've learned in South Africa, we have 11 spoken languages, African languages, and then now in addition, South African Sign Language. So this will have a huge impact on government's work and to ensure that their offices are accessible. So government institutions, we do have PANSAL, that is the Pan South African Language Board for all spoken languages and now also for South African Sign Language. So PANSAL has a national language body for South African Sign Language to create more terminology and then also to look at the lexicography of the language. And then also the universities are opening their doors towards the deaf community. In the past, we can say that they're only focusing on training deaf people to become teachers and on science. So recently, we have 2 deaf lawyers. One have graduated, one is busy with his degree, and so we do not have medical doctors that can sign. So we need to make sure that deaf people can access these courses at a university level so that we can have more deaf professionals and that we can, so that those signs also needs to be researched as well. In the theatre, theatres have been communicating with us. They also want sign language in theatres where deaf people can go for recreation. And so that is very interesting for us, so to meet these challenges.
All right. If possible, if you can make your response in 30 or 40 seconds, I want you to speak on adults who wish to learn sign language. Are there learning opportunities? And what more can be done to create further awareness?
We have 2 processes here in South Africa. For the one process is that there's basic South African Sign Language courses that are available for the public to learn, and then they can 1 or 2, 3 weeks they can have a crash course, and that's more of an introduction to South African Sign Language, and then will enable them to introduce themselves to the deaf community. So then deaf people have set up businesses in this. So if the second process would be that we will call, is that an accredited process. DeafSA is an accredited, where deaf people or hearing people come and can learn this, and that is been a process that has been established with SAQA, the South African Qualification Authority, where they can then accredited courses where they can get credits for the course, and that is available to the public. So we now rolling up our sleeves to make sure that we can raise more awareness so that we can have South African Sign Language classes, and also to see where there is some gaps so that we can address those gaps. So if parents of deaf children wants to learn South African Sign Language, then they can then enter these courses. And also we have the universities in South Africa that already has South African Sign Language as a subject. And they have very good and well-established programs where they can then study, and then also on FET level, further educational training, they can also then access then courses there. So what we need to do is to raise awareness so that deaf people can have access to tertiary institutions. So we have approximately so many schools in South Africa and worldwide where they can also contact schools of the deaf.
So much to talk about, but I'm afraid we're out of time. So thank you very much, Bruno, for speaking with us.
Thank you for this opportunity. Thanks.